$197 billion. That's the value of Abqaiq, the beating heart of Saudi Arabia's oil production, now a smoking ruin after Iran's hypersonic barrage ripped through its heart at 3:47 a.m. Riyadh time. 17 Shahed 238 drones, 4 Khaibar-Shikan ballistic missiles, 0 interceptions by Patriot batteries. The world's most critical energy choke point, the facility that processes 7 million barrels daily, reduced to a crematorium of twisted steel and vaporized crude. While CNN looped footage of State Department spokesmen promising measured responses and Fox replayed the same fireball from 6 different angles, the real money was already 3 moves ahead. BlackRock's Energy Infrastructure Fund liquidated $89 billion in positions before Asian markets opened. Aramco's shadow trading desk in Geneva moved 340 million barrels of futures contracts into Chinese hands. The Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund transferred $120 billion in T-bills into Swiss gold vaults before dawn prayers in Mecca. This wasn't just an attack, this was the detonation of the financial architecture that's held since Bretton Woods. And your 401k is zip-tied to the wreckage. 75% of Saudi Arabia's crude export capacity flows through Abqaiq separation towers and stabilization units. One facility, 5.7 million barrels per day, 6% of global supply, gone, not damaged, not temporarily offline, structurally annihilated. The blast radius forensics are already in. Iran didn't just hit buildings, they surgically destroyed the gas oil separation plant's molecular sieve units, the sulfur recovery complex, and every single backup compressor station. Equipment manufactured by a consortium of German, Japanese, and American firms with 18-month lead times even in peacetime. Wartime? Try never. Your gas pump hits $7.80 by Halloween, $11.40 by Christmas. Diesel, the fluid that moves every calorie you eat, breaks $9.20 per gallon, making trucking routes over 200 miles economically non-viable. The average American grocery bill, currently $450 monthly, explodes to $640 within 8 weeks, as diesel costs cascade through cold storage, transportation, and retail markup. Your retirement account, if it holds any energy sector exposure or inflation-sensitive bonds, just evaporated 34% of its real purchasing power in the time it took you to sleep through last night. This isn't geopolitics as entertainment. This is the weaponization of thermodynamics against your material existence. Here's the mechanism, the trap you didn't know you were inside. Saudi Arabia produces 12.3 million barrels daily. Abqaiq doesn't just process crude, it's the central nervous system. Raw crude from Ghawar, Safania, and Sheba fields arrives contaminated with hydrogen sulfide, water, sand. Abqaiq's towers separate, stabilize, sweeten. Without it, Saudi crude is toxic sludge. Refineries from Rotterdam to Yokohama can't touch it. Aramco's export terminals at Ras Tanura sit idle, their loading arms frozen, supertankers anchored offshore burning cash at $80,000 per day, waiting for cargo that will never arrive. The Saudis have 90-day strategic reserves. Sounds comfortable until you do the math. They export 7 million barrels daily. 90 days times 7 million equals 630 million barrels. Current Aramco reserve drawdown rate, accounting for domestic consumption spikes and emergency military fuel allocations, they're burning 9.2 million barrels daily now. New timeline, 68 days until the kingdom's tanks run dry, but the real detonation happens in the derivatives market, a $600 trillion hallucination built on the assumption of continuous supply. Energy futures contracts aren't just speculation. They're the collateral underneath pension funds, municipal bonds, corporate debt rollovers. JP Morgan Chase holds $1.47 trillion in oil-linked swap positions. Goldman's commodities desk, $890 billion. These aren't bets. They're the load-bearing pillars of dollar liquidity. When physical delivery fails, when tankers can't load because Abqaiq is a crater, the contracts enter default cascades. Contango spreads, where future oil costs more than spot, just inverted into super backwardation. Spot crude hit $164 per barrel in after-hours trading, while 90-day futures collapsed to $71 because nobody believes there will be delivery in 90 days. That $93 spread is a market screaming one word: apocalypse. Basel III regulations, enforced globally since April, require banks to mark these positions to market daily. No more hiding toxic assets in off-balance sheet vehicles. Reality intrudes. Morgan Stanley's latest filing, leaked, not published, shows $340 billion in energy exposure, now marked at 61 cents on the dollar. The write-downs trigger capital ratio violations. Liquidity crunch, the repo market, where banks borrow overnight using bonds as collateral, seizes. Lending stops. The Federal Reserve's quantitative tightening, the plan to reduce the balance sheet by $95 billion monthly, died at 4:12 a.m. when Jerome Powell's emergency line lit up. By 6 a.m., the New York Fed announced $380 billion in emergency term repo operations. By noon, Congress quietly suspended debt ceiling enforcement. The printing presses are screaming back to life, but this time there's no asset to buy that isn't contaminated by energy collapse. Think of the economy as a living organism. Oil is blood. Abqaiq was the heart valve. You just watched a cardiac arrest in real time, and the defibrillator runs on diesel generators that are now rationed. 70% of global freight moves on diesel. Container ships, 18-wheelers, rail locomotives, farm combines, every Walmart shelf, every Amazon delivery, every grain silo, all dependent on 320 diesel. At 9:20, the math breaks. A truck hauling produce from California's Central Valley to Chicago costs $4,800 in fuel alone now. That's before driver wages, insurance, maintenance, margins evaporate, routes cancel. Within 12 days, protein shortages hit. Chicken, pork, beef, all dependent on refrigerated transport. Spoilage rates triple. Grocery stores ration. Food banks close. SNAP benefits, already stressed, fail to cover 40% of a family's caloric needs at new price levels. By week 3, pharmaceuticals. Insulin production in Indiana requires feedstock chemicals shipped from Louisiana refineries running on, you guessed it, diesel and natural gas liquids processed through facilities analogous to Abqaiq. Supply chains fragment. Diabetics start dying quietly in exurban America. To understand where this ends, we have to go back to 1973, October, the Yom Kippur War. Egypt and Syria attacked Israel on the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. The United States airlifted $2.2 billion in weapons to Tel Aviv. OPEC, the Arab members, responded with an oil embargo targeting America and its allies. Production cuts, 5 million barrels per day. 4 months, crude prices quadrupled from $3 to $12 per barrel. The macroeconomic devastation was immediate and total. U.S. GDP contracted 3.2% in 6 months. Inflation hit 11.3%. Unemployment spiked to 9%. Gas stations ran dry, rationing by license plate number, odd, even days. Lines stretched for miles, fistfights at pumps, National Guard deployments to refineries. Nixon faced a choice: capitulate or restructure global finance. On August 15, 1971, 2 years before the embargo, he'd already closed the gold window, severing the dollar's last tie to tangible value. By 1973, he doubled down. Flood the system with dollars, bailouts for automakers, price controls that created artificial shortages, wage freezes that collapsed real income. The 1970s weren't just disco and malaise, they were civilizational vertigo. The first time Americans experienced imperial decline as a physical sensation. Gas lines, bread lines, savings accounts yielding 5% while inflation ran 13%. Your money lost value sitting still. But 1973 was a shallow flesh wound compared to today's sucking chest wound. In 1973, the embargo cut 4% of global supply. Abqaiq's destruction removed 6%. In 1973, global derivatives markets totaled maybe $2 trillion. Today, $600 trillion. In 1973, supply chains had slack. Warehouses held 90 days of inventory. Today's just-in-time logistics hold 4.7 days on average. In 1973, the U.S. produced 9.2 million barrels daily domestically. Today, despite fracking's miracle, we import 3.2 million barrels daily, and our refining capacity is optimized for light sweet crude, not the heavy sour stuff we can produce. The brittle complexity is the kill shot. Paul Volcker, appointed Fed chair in 1979, broke inflation by raising the federal funds rate to 20%. Mortgages hit 18.45%. Unemployment climbed to 10.8%. It worked, but it took a decade of agony and a population that still trusted institutions. Today's Fed can't raise rates beyond 5.5% without triggering $8 trillion in corporate debt defaults. The pain threshold is lower. The tolerance for authority is zero. And 1973 didn't have Iran holding a nuclear breakout capability 30 days away, didn't have China waiting in the wings with a petroleum alternative, didn't have a U.S. military stretched across 750 bases worldwide, running on fuel reserves now being diverted to keep the 7th Fleet operational in the Persian Gulf. Iran's strike wasn't impulsive. It was architected. Backtrack to January 3, 2020. Qasem Soleimani, Iran's strategic mastermind, vaporized by a U.S. drone strike at Baghdad International Airport. Iran's supreme leader Khamenei wept publicly, the first time in 40 years, and vowed harsh retaliation. It came 5 days later, 16 ballistic missiles at Al-Assad Air Base, symbolic, telegraphed, designed to satisfy honor without triggering full war. But Soleimani's real legacy was the strategy now unfolding. He spent 2 decades building the axis of resistance: Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, Shia militias in Iraq, Assad's regime in Syria, not to invade, but to encircle, to position precision strike capabilities within range of every critical node in the Gulf's energy infrastructure. The Abraham Accords, Trump's 2020 triumph normalizing Israel-UAE-Bahrain relations, were the trigger. Saudi Arabia was next. Iran saw the encirclement, a Sunni Jewish economic bloc controlling Gulf oil, underwritten by American power, pricing China and Russia out. Checkmate unless the board flipped, so they waited. built hypersonic missiles, gamed Patriot radar frequencies, identified Abqaiq's exact vulnerabilities through a mole, rumored to be a Ukrainian contractor who installed sensors in 2019, planned the strike for maximum chaos, Hajj pilgrimage season, OPEC meeting scheduled for next week, U.S. elections 14 months out, one strike, 7 targets, the global order shattered, now project forward. 12 months from today. If Abqaiq remains offline, and every engineering assessment says 9-14 months minimum for partial capacity, Saudi Arabia becomes a net oil importer by March 2026. The kingdom that built glass towers in the desert, that bribed its population into submission with subsidized fuel and no taxes, faces insolvency. The rial, pegged to the dollar at 3.75 since 1986, breaks. Capital flight accelerates. The House of Saud, already shaky after Khashoggi's dismemberment and Yemen's quagmire, faces internal revolt. The Strait of Hormuz, 20 miles wide, carrying 21% of global oil, becomes a war zone. Iran mines it. The U.S. Navy clears lanes, loses 2 destroyers to submarine-launched torpedoes. Insurance rates for tankers hit 400% of cargo value. Shipping stops. Europe enters depression first. Germany's industrial base, chemicals, automobiles, machinery, runs on steady crude imports. Russian gas is already gone. Saudi oil gone. Norway's North Sea output can't fill the gap. Manufacturing PMI collapses to 31, worse than 2008. Unemployment in Spain hits 28%. Italy's government falls. France deploys riot police to every major city as fuel protests morph into anti-immigrant pogroms. China makes its move, offers Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait a deal. Sell to us in yuan, we'll provide naval escorts and air defense systems. The Gulf states, abandoned by a bankrupt America, accept. By September 2026, 40% of global oil trades in yuan. The petrodollar, the arrangement where oil sales recycle into U.S. treasuries, funding our deficits, dies. Treasury yields spike to 7.8%. The U.S. can't roll over its $34 trillion debt. Default looms. Domestically, the U.S. fractures. Blue states with EV infrastructure and rail networks fare slightly better. Red states dependent on trucks and combustion face collapse. Texas, despite its oil production, can't refine enough without imports of specialized crude grades. Blackouts, food riots in Houston, Dallas. Governors activate National Guard. Federal authority dissolves into regional fiefdoms. The unprepared, the majority, watch their reality disintegrate in real time. Savings and money market funds yield 2% while inflation runs 19%. Rent comes due. Paychecks don't stretch. Credit cards max out at 31% APR. Evictions spike. Tent cities metastasize from LA and Seattle to Phoenix and Atlanta. Hospitals overflow with malnutrition cases, preventable infections from lack of antibiotics. The prepared, those who read the yield curve inversion in April 2023 as prophecy, they positioned months ago. Physical gold, up 52% since the strike. Farmland with water rights. Diesel reserves in buried tanks. Shortwave radios. They're trading eggs and labor in gray markets while fiat burns. This isn't war escalation. This is the final harvest of an economic model built on the assumption of infinite energy at stable prices. Every empire in history died the same death, not invasion, embargo. Severance from the resources that sustained complexity. Mesopotamia's city-states collapsed when Hittite expansion cut tin roots from Afghanistan. Bronze weapons require tin-copper alloy. No tin, no swords, no defense. Uruk, Lagash, Ash. Rome lasted 5 centuries on Egyptian grain and Iberian silver. When Vandals seized North Africa's breadbasket in 435 AD, Rome's population halved in a generation. When Visigothic raids cut silver mines, currency debased, legions disbanded, the empire fractured into warlord statelets. The Dutch Golden Age ran on Baltic grain and Asian spices. When England's navigation acts blocked their trade routes in 1651, Amsterdam's finance collapsed within 30 years. The British Empire ran on coal, then oil. When Suez closed in 1956 and America refused to back the pound, sterling's reserve status evaporated. The sun set. The American century runs on 20 million barrels of oil daily. We produce 13 million. We import the rest. Abqaiq's destruction just amputated 6% of global supply. The math is simple. The consequences are biblical. The deep state isn't men in rooms plotting. It's the emergent logic of systems, the algorithms that execute trillion-dollar trades in microseconds, the Basel III compliance officers marking portfolios to market, the OPEC plus WhatsApp groups coordinating cuts, the Beijing Politburo members watching treasury auctions fail. They didn't create this crisis. They positioned for it because they've read the same history. They know the pattern. Oil isn't just fuel. It's liquidity made physical, the substance that allows goods to move, cities to eat, hospitals to function. Sever it, and complexity collapses into simplicity. Feudalism with iPhones. The strike on Abqaiq wasn't about Saudi Arabia. It was about breaking the illusion that modernity is permanent, that supply chains are stable, that your dollars will always buy food. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The meter is shortening. Subscribe to see the pattern.